All right, let's dive into one of the wildest, most dangerous, and honestly most fascinating chapters in the entire history of medicine. A time when a doctor, facing a patient who was bleeding out, would turn and yell for, well, for milk.
I know, it sounds like something out of a comedy sketch, right? But for a short and very strange period of time, this was no joke. It was an actual medical procedure. So the big question is, why? Why on earth would anyone think injecting milk into someone's veins was a good idea?
Well, the answer really starts with one word: desperation. We're talking about the 19th century here, and if you were in a medical emergency, doctors just didn't have a good way to replace lost blood. They were willing to try pretty much anything to save a life, and they were working with a serious lack of scientific knowledge.
To really get why they turned to such a bizarre solution, you have to understand the deadly problem they were up against. The issue wasn't just losing blood. It was that blood itself was proving to be a terrible, totally unpredictable medicine.
You see, the idea of transfusions had been kicking around for a while. Back in 1628, William Harvey figured out how blood circulates, which was a massive step forward. But actually doing it, that was a complete and utter disaster. Doctors tried transfusing blood from animals into people. They even had this weird idea that a lamb's gentle blood might cure insanity. As you can probably guess, the results were often deadly, and the practice got banned for over 150 years.
So when they finally started trying again in the mid-1800s, they ran into the exact same problems. Blood would clot, donors often died, and the person receiving the blood would have these violent, unpredictable reactions. The doctors were totally stumped. They needed a way to get around what they called blood's pesky characteristics.
And that's what led them to their big idea. A workaround that seems absolutely bonkers to us today, but to them, it made a weird kind of sense. They figured, if we can't use blood, let's find a substitute. And their pick? You guessed it, milk.
Okay, so here's our logic, and you kind of have to squint to see it. It was based on a huge misunderstanding of biology. When they looked at milk under a microscope, they saw these tiny fatty particles, and to them, those particles looked a whole lot like what they called white corpuscles, what we now call white blood cells. So they came up with this incredible theory. If you inject milk into the body, those little milk particles would magically turn into new blood cells.
And listen, this wasn't some fringe idea from a lone quack. This was seen as a real scientific step forward. Medical journals at the time were literally saying that milk seemed like the perfect choice. They genuinely thought they'd found a life-saving miracle that got around all the problems of using actual blood.
So the first doctors to actually put this theory to the test were a pair in Toronto named James Bovell and Edwin Hodder. It was 1854, right in the middle of a deadly cholera epidemic. They took the plunge, and they injected 12 ounces of cow's milk straight into the veins of a dying patient. And this is where their promising, if, deeply flawed theory collided head-on with a very, very grim reality. Yeah, the experiment did not go as planned. At first, it looked like a massive success. Their first patient and then a second one actually seemed to get better. They survived. Can you imagine? It must have felt like a miracle. But that hope, it didn't last. The very next 5 patients they tried this on all died shortly after the procedure. And tragically, this became the norm. Despite the early deaths, the practice actually caught on, especially in North America. But patients kept having these horrific reactions. We're talking about terrible chest pain, dizziness, their eyes moving uncontrollably, raging fevers, slipping into a coma, and, way too often, death.
And here's where it gets even more wild. It just shows how backward their scientific process was. In a complete flip of how we do things today, one doctor, Joseph Howe, only tried the procedure on dogs after he'd seen the deadly results in humans. He'd bleed them until they passed out, then inject the milk. Every single dog died.
You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Nope. Dr. Howe just figured, maybe the problem is animal milk. So he tried again, this time with human milk. The result? His patient immediately stopped breathing. And his solution for reviving her, and I am quoting directly from the medical report here, was injections of morphine and whiskey. It's just a shocking little detail that paints a picture of how desperate and frankly dangerous this era of medicine really was.
Thankfully, you can't ignore overwhelming evidence forever. The constant, deadly failures of the milk transfusion fad finally forced the medical world to stop looking for a substitute and start looking for a real, scientific solution.
By 1884, the whole practice was pretty much dead and buried. It was widely discredited, and doctors switched to much safer, though temporary, saline infusions to replace lost fluid. The age of injecting milk into people's veins was officially over.
But in a strange way, this whole bizarre, fatal detour was actually a necessary step. The absolute, undeniable failure of using milk forced scientists to stop looking for shortcuts. They had to go back to the original question: what was so pesky about blood in the first place?
And in 1901, they got their answer. An Austrian physician named Karl Landsteiner made the crucial discovery. He figured out the fundamental truth that not all human blood is the same. His identification of blood groups, A, B, and O, was the key. Those violent reactions weren't a flaw in the blood itself. It was because different types just weren't compatible. That one discovery made safe transfusions possible, and it changed medicine forever.
The story of milk transfusions is a really humbling reminder of how far science has come, and it forces us to ask a pretty tough question. What accepted medical practices of our time are going to look just as strange and just as misguided to the doctors of the future?